Greetings, viewers around the world. My name is Alex, and we are here today to let's talk about China Roundtable. And the topic for today is democracy. Now, I'm joined here with a couple of distinguished guests here. One is Mr. Zhang Weiwei, professor. He's the Dean of China Institute and Fudan University. And to my right here is Daniel Dumbrill, a content creator. And I would like to, maybe you gentlemen could introduce yourself to our audience. We'll start with you, Professor. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
I have spent many years in Europe. I did my PhD in Geneva University. And I returned to China about 10, 11 years ago. And now Dean of China Institute, Fudan University.
Well, thank you, Professor. And Daniel Dumbrill, a content creator and a good friend of mine. Daniel, tell the audience about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Daniel Dumbrill. I've been in China since 2008, mostly in Shenzhen and a couple of years in Hong Kong. I'm a business owner and started creating online content in 2019 when I felt like kind of telling the other side of the story here in China. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Professor Zhang before and also a very big fan of his work.
Now, our topic today, as I said before, is China-style democracy. And I'm going to go to you, Professor, first of all. Can you explain to us what's your idea of true democracy and how does democracy play out in China and how are the demands and the people responding to it?
Democracy, this very term, for one reason or another, was first registered in the West. As a result, today in the mainstream media, especially in the West, whenever you mention democracy, it refers to multi-party system, one person, one vote. I would describe this as procedural democracy. So China has adopted a different approach. We focus on what I call the substantive democracy, the objective of democracy, and then try to explore procedures appropriate to China's national conditions. For instance, this process of exploring is quite long. For instance, China began to experiment since early 1980s. One person, one vote at the grassroots level, at the village level. At that time, the idea was gradually it will be a kind of one person, one vote at township level, village level, township level, county level, and municipality level, and even central government. But after over 3 decades of experiments, we find that this grassroots village level election had not been as good as we thought. The result is not satisfactory. We have all kinds of studies. You have all kinds of problems that we see in Taiwan, mafia politics, family connections, involvement of money, etc. So since about 10, 15 years ago, we began to focus on restructuring of the grassroots village level election. I call this system as selection plus election, selection first. And since then, village level election has become better and better. And then proceeding from this selection plus election, we can also see this is a level of democracy even now for China's top leadership. In other words, if you want to become, say, a member of the top 7 standing committee of the CPC Party Central Committee, in most cases, the requirement is 2 terms, if not 3 terms, in most cases 3 terms even, as number 1 of a Chinese province, which means literally you have governed over 100 million people before you come to your current position. So this is extremely competitive. That's why I always claim, the Chinese leadership is among the most competent in the world, no doubt about this. And then at another level is what I call the consultative democracy, which is indeed, I think China is doing much, much better than any other country. This is within the Chinese culture. We talk about, we have a WeChat revolution. Why WeChat revolution? Because people need to consult each other. So this consultative democracy is practiced from the central government, from the party, from the political consultative committee, down to grassroots, down to my institute, down to Fudan University, down to any factory or companies. When you need something, you have a consultation through WeChat, through other means. So what we call is a democratic centralism. That's the way how China deals with what we call the problem of populism, extreme populism, which is dangerous in today's politics with the involvement money, with the new social media. You have all kinds of populist tendencies. But in China, our system of democracy allows for what we call the from the people to the people, one round. To the people, from people, another round. Then from people to people again, several rounds. With several rounds of consultations, you can reach consensus and then move the nation forward. So I always make fun of my British friends. I said, mind your business, don't always criticize China democracy. Great Britain may become Little Britain if you continue with this referendum, which is very, very backward system, I would say. It's 21st century, it's not a Greek time. So why not have consultative democracy? You have 3.6% difference, then you left the EU. We can make at least a consensus based on 30% difference, but you have less than 4% difference. The fate of nation is closed. It's unfair.
Professor, you make some good points, and when you were talking about Britain, as you know, one of our guests and co-hosts here, Daniel Dumbrill, is from Canada as well. Daniel, I'm going to actually, it's a perfect setup for this question here, is that actually you've been living in China for years.
Yeah.
Do you feel there's democracy here in China?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely ties into, it depends on how people are going to define the word democracy, as Professor Zhang has said. And I don't want to talk too much about Chinese, democracy per se. I like to, we have a guest who's very, very knowledgeable on that here, but I like to make comparisons and see what I see the differences are. And I would say that because you don't have a multi-party system here, you don't have these factions that allow a society to become distracted with fighting each other. There's a really interesting book called Democracy for Realists, and they show how actually when you have these different parties, the party doesn't adapt to the needs of the people actually adapt their views to fit into that club, into that group. And there's a few small exceptions, like for example, a female Republican is less likely to change her views on reproductive rights, probably because it affects her more personally. She's more likely to change to the Democratic Party than to stay in the Republican Party. But here in China, you don't have this problem with infighting. And when there's anger towards the government, it's fairly unified, and everybody says we need this to change. And here you don't have the luxury of every 4 years being able to change a new leader, because that's almost like a kind of a pressure release valve, in my opinion also, where all of a sudden people can say, our problems are to blame on the last government. Now we have a new one. Now we have hope again. And Obama even used that word specifically, hope. Everybody hopes the next time around. And it doesn't matter if the new leader does exactly the same thing as the last one, you can just rinse and repeat constantly and constantly using this 4-year pressure valve, pressure release valve. The Chinese government doesn't have that luxury. They are, they're responsible to the people, and they have to answer the problems that come up. I remember one of the earliest examples I saw was when I first came here, there was a truck driver on the highway, and he was unable, he was too tired, so he pulled into a service station to sleep overnight, and he went over 24 hours. Then when he got off of the highway, they charged him a lot of extra fees because he went over 24 hours. And everybody was angry at that. They were saying, you want this driver to continue driving tired and endanger everybody else on the road? Well, very quickly after that, almost all the service stations on the highway, or at least every other service station, has dedicated sleeping areas now for trucks to pull in. So that's just a very small example of that. And then you don't have the risk of populism also. And I like, Professor Zhang mentioned that also. And Kishore Mahbubani says something similar as well, where he says that the world really needs to think, do they really want China to have a system like the West, to become a populist country where it's a popularity contest, and all of a sudden you have to try to, foster this nationalism, and all of a sudden they're going to want revenge for things like what happened during, when the Japanese were, and all these things, and to rely on xenophobia and things like that. So these are the different kinds of the differences I've noticed. I mean, I'm sure every system has its positives and negatives, but I think for a China system it works quite well for itself. And I think it was you who made this point before. There's not this one system that's right for everybody. It's not like we would say that this is the system that the West should adopt also. And certainly, China shouldn't adopt the West's system wholesale either.
What I am finding in the Western politics is a consistent challenge on funding now.
Yeah.
It's the people that are running for government. If you don't have the funding, your words cannot be joined in from a group that's going to vote you in. You either have to have that financial stability behind you. What promises have you made to get that funding to become either a congressman or a member or even a mayor in various states in the United States, even in Canada? If you're going to run for parliament, you have to have a big campaign budget. You have to have big donors. If you don't have that, you're not even in the game to actually make a change in your country.
I think the numbers the average spend was something like $12 million to become a senator in the US. And the people who are giving that money, they're expecting a return on that investment. And then compounded by the fact that you don't have this meritocracy-based system. And actually, I don't know if you mind to remake the point you made. There was one point you made in the Nexus Forum, which I really liked, which was your prediction on a president worse than George Bush.
So gentlemen, that's going to be our warm-up point for this discussion today. We're just going to take a few moments here for a little bit of a break, and we'll come back to our viewers.